right, then we're moving on to I don't know what part we're on, maybe part 4 or 5, something like that. Anyway, we're going to continue on this on the feminism teaching. If you want to follow along, you can go to creationliberty.com, type in feminism, Feminism, into the search bar, and that will give you the article, Feminism, Satan's Plan to Destroy Your Family. Or if you're listening by YouTube, you can click the link in the description, and that'll take you roughly to where we are, but you'll have to scroll down to match up where we are. And I guess just as a quick note before I begin, I was just looking at, I just saw another thing on people raising a bunch of money for cancer awareness, and I have tried to talk to these people, and I'm telling you, in trying to talk to these people, no one's listening. I mean, I have tried to talk to these people doing this event where they raise a bunch of money for cancer. I've done it before. I can't get one person to listen. I mean, if you guys don't understand, if you're suffering cancer or have people who are suffering cancer, just type in the word cancer, C-A-N-C-E-R, into the search bar, creationliberty.com. Read what you find there, okay? And I cannot, the article that I have on it's called The Cure for Cancer. Read it. People are throwing millions of dollars. I mean, collectively, I've seen people donate thousands and thousands of dollars to things that are not helping. When the cure for cancer has been known for a very long time, hundreds of thousands of people have cured themselves of cancer by these methods. And I'm telling you, I mean, in my entire history, I've never personally gotten anybody to convert on the issue. There's only one person I could get to take me seriously, and that was a person who already did it. He didn't know why, but his family had a tradition of eating seeds. And that was the only person I could get to even listen to me. He says, wow, everything you're saying makes sense. Because my grandpa had cancer, we got him these seeds, and then he didn't have cancer anymore. That's all I remember from when I was younger. And then he says, and our family has a tradition of doing it, and none of us have ever had cancer. So he took me seriously. But the only person I get to take me seriously is somebody who's already doing it. Really incredible. So I just wanted to make that note. I know that's not on topic, but just please check that out, because I'm so tired of hearing people just say, the reason I get frustrated with it when they say, well, my mom has cancer, or I'm a cancer survivor, or I'm suffering cancer right now, and I'm just tired of hearing it. I don't even want to hear it from them. It's because they will not listen. They don't even want to find a cure. They really don't. They just want to throw money at something. I mean, the level of deception is just blowing my mind. Anyway, sorry, we'll continue on. I want to get into the feminism teaching, but I want to make mention of that too. So last week we left off, and I was talking about how there were boys that were making lower grades because the letter grade in the public education system is not an analysis of knowledge and learning, it's an analysis of behavior. And the typical behavior pattern in the United States public education system is, well, everything is measured by the standard of the female. So how good a letter grade you get is more analyzed by how female you act. That's the bottom line. And it's true. There's many classes that I've taken where it's more you're showing up and your behavior pattern was most of your grade. It really wasn't what kind of learning you did while you were in the class. Take this for example. I've had biases in the public education system before. Now this wasn't a female. This is actually a male teacher that I had who just hated me. Okay, and I've wondered. I guess since then I never really checked, but I've wondered how often this has actually happened to me and I didn't even know, or how often it's happened to many of you and you didn't even know. There was a guy when I was in 6th grade. He hated me. Okay, and that's because I was more vocal about hating what we were doing. I mean, I wasn't that vocal, but I would mention every now and again, I was like, this is stupid. Why are we doing this? And the problem is they didn't have a legitimate answer. See, most of the teachers I asked, throughout my schooling, I asked certain teachers why we were doing certain things, and they didn't have an answer. One of the I challenged a teacher on algebra one time. I said, explain to me the purpose of algebra. Why are we learning this? I said, is it that we need to learn algebra so that way in case somebody wants to go to college and learn to be an algebra teacher, they need to know algebra so they can come back and teach more algebra? She had no response to that except see me after class. And then when I saw her after class, she wanted to talk to me about my behavior. What a teacher, man. What a teacher. I mean, golly, you can't even explain why you're doing something? What has your entire life been about? You went to college for this stuff. You had to have had some reason. I'm just asking for a reason. Perhaps because I needed some motivation to do the work. And I mean, back when I was in 6th grade, I remember there was this teacher. He failed me on all 3 courses, and I knew I wasn't going to pass the 6th grade if he did that. Because I had 3 courses with him, and I had like 4 courses with another teacher, right? They split them between 2. And so I was like, you've got to be kidding, because it didn't seem right. I realized I wasn't doing that great in his class because I wasn't trying very much, but I was doing enough to get by. And it didn't seem right. And I asked if I could see, because he was going through all the grades with different people. It was kind of a more relaxed day. He was just, with all the students, he was going through the grades and stuff. And he had his grade book open where he wrote all the grades down. And I asked him if I could look at it, and he said it was okay. So I looked at it, and I took a pencil and paper, and I wrote down every single number that he had on there for all the grades that I'd had through all my testing and everything. I wrote all of them down. Now, I was smart enough, as dumb as I was then, I was smart enough to do averages. So I said, okay, let's do the averages in all 3 classes. When I averaged them out, I found out that each class, he scored me exactly 10% lower than what the average actually came out to. I actually passed all the classes, but he on purpose graded me exactly 10% lower. He just he pulled out the average and then lowered it 10% so I would fail. I went back to him and showed him that. He goes, "Oh, well, that must have been a mistake. I'll go ahead and correct that." Never apologized for it. I knew what he did. Never apologized for it or nothing, you see, because it's just everybody is standardized. Even the men are doing it. They're standardizing how they grade people based on how female do you act. And that's it's a standardized testing to be more like a girl. Boys are just automatically biased against. Now I realize there's been bias against girls too. Okay, I know all you women out there objecting, well, I had a guy teacher that was biased against me. I understand that. Okay, and we hear about that quite often. I've heard about that from many different women. They complain about a lot of that stuff, but we never typically hear anything about the boys talking about their biases. I've had female teachers, so many female teachers biased against me. I mean, it's crazy how many. I've had a lot of male teachers too. Not a lot, because there weren't that many male teachers that I had growing up, but the female teachers that hated me. I mean, I couldn't list them all out to you. There's a huge bias against boys that is almost never talked about. Now, the girls voice the bias against them all the time, but we almost never hear about the boys. Why? Because boys are not taught to voice it. Because if you're voicing that, it's not manly. It's not a male thing to do. You need to take it. That's what men are taught to do. They're taught to take the damage, take the beating, and move on. Because they're taught to be tougher, therefore you don't hear as much about it. Okay? But what's happening is that girls' grades over the course of decades have been skyrocketing. And however, here's the important part. On standardized testing, IQ achievement testing, boys are still outscoring girls, even though girls are getting higher grades. This is from articles that have come out from the Journal of Educational Psychology and studies that they've done. Self-disciplined girls gives girls the edge. Gender in self-discipline grades and achievement test scores, in which they said, quote, "Throughout elementary, middle, and high school, girls earn higher grades than boys in all major subjects. Girls, however, do not outperform boys on achievement or IQ tests," end quote. So, I mean, the assessment of the grades are based on the behavior, like I was talking about, like you sit quietly in a seat for long hours every day, or you perform these menial tasks over and over and over, which boys have a much harder time doing than girls. Okay. Now, I remember back when I was in high school, you had what I guess would be, there was a, what was it? There's like a little community school that was in Shelbyville. It's about 10 minutes from here. And what would happen is that our school was linked with this community school in which people had the option, any student had the option to join in on this community school situation where they had more hands-on stuff. Like what they would do is they would go and learn a trade. They would go to this community place for the first half of the day and then come back to school for learning the second half of the day. They would go learn to work on cars. They would do woodworking and metalworking and all sorts of stuff. They did hands-on activities. Now what's interesting is that it was considered to be more the delinquent crowd that went to that. And it almost always, nearly 100% consisted of boys. They went to do these things. Now, it's always considered the delinquent crowd that goes to there, but what's interesting to me is that I believe that those boys today probably got a better education than most of the rest of the boys that didn't go there. And they probably learned an actual trade that's going to help them throughout life and probably help them much more than the rest of the boys that took the standardized schooling. If I could go back and do it again, I would have done what they were doing because it made a whole lot more sense. And what it did is it gave them something to do besides sit in a chair all day. See, a lot of girls tend to be a lot more obedient to just, sit down, do what you're told, that kind of thing. Boys tend to they're growing into being leaders. They're growing into stepping out and getting out there and taking their first steps to get out into the world and accomplish something. They need to have hands-on stuff because they are not the same as girls. And treating the entire classroom as if they're all girls is convenient for a teacher, but is not good for education. And that's why I'm saying the public education system, they don't care about educating your children. They care about making them behave so the teachers can get through the day a little easier. It's really what it comes down to. I'm not saying every teacher in the public education system is evil. Every time I talk about these issues, I used to talk about issues like this in different church buildings. I'd always have come up and says, well, I'm a teacher, or this person I know is a teacher, or not everyone's bad. I said, I didn't say everyone's bad. I'm giving you the facts and you're losing your mind over it. It's like they're so afraid to address the truth because somebody might look bad. Are we so afraid to tell the truth? Because, in the eyes of many people, I'm going to look bad for teaching these things. I don't care if I look bad. I want to tell you the truth so you can have a full understanding. Because in reality, you need to question, what is education? Really? What is education? Have you ever stopped and thought about what that means? The word means? Education in general just means an upbringing. That's all it means. It's an upbringing or a teacher of mannerisms. A teaching of mannerisms. So when you teach mannerisms, you're teaching this is the manner in which you should act. This is the manner in which you should speak. This is the manner in which you should think. It's an upbringing. Whose responsibility is it to give them an upbringing? It's the parents. The parents have the responsibility. But when the parents take the responsibility of the upbringing of teaching of mannerisms, which, by the way, is a philosophy, you're teaching your children a way of thinking to affect their actions and their words, what they do, what they say. Okay? When you take that responsibility and you say, I'm not going to take responsibility for it, I'm going to hand it over to the state, I'm going to hand it over to these strangers and let them do it. And then you wonder why your children turn out so poorly, or they fight against you, or when they're in their teenage years, they rebel against you. You wonder why this is happening? I mean, it's foolishness to even sit back and wonder. I mean, it's your fault. It was your responsibility, and then what most parents do is they sit back and say, well, my child's just like this. How could you be so cruel? To do that kind of thing to your child, to allow them to learn all these disgusting, wicked philosophies, and they'll go to the school system and learn evolution from the very first grade school levels. They'll learn that wicked philosophy that they make all sorts of decisions based on that. I mean, again, you bring them into the school system, you teach them, hey guys, you're a monkey, and then you wonder why they act like monkeys. There's a reason for it. You're teaching them a philosophy. And then when these parents hand their children over to the state, having state teach them all sorts of bad philosophies that's going to make them rebellious and make them angry because they subconsciously know they're being lied to, but they don't know how and why they're being lied to. And they can't really tell what exactly they're being lied to about, so they're going to get angry and rebellious, and then I'm going to sit back and blame them for it. How could you be so cruel and take no responsibility? That bothers me. I don't know what to say to people about that. I don't know what else to say. It bothers me, okay? And like I've said before, I remember numerous classes I had growing up where the grade was dependent upon attendance, participation, and your behavior, rather than understanding the material, which is what testing is supposed to be based on, okay? And it's funny because when I was in high school, I had to go back because I failed a number of courses, math and English courses in particular, okay? Which, by the way, later on, I ended up learning a lot of algebra on my own because I started doing programming. And I had a blast programming. I was like, we use so much algebra. Algebra's fun. Yeah, when I started programming video games for myself, I was like, algebra is really fun. When you actually have a purpose for it, it's amazing how fun it can be. But most people never have a purpose. They just go in, they see these papers with a bunch of numbers, and they're like, this is boring. And it's true, that is boring under that context. If you put it under a context in which it can be fun, it's amazing what you can do with it. And it's amazing what students, how they will surprise you with what they know. But in English courses, I mean, here I am. I'm going on to be an author. And I failed English courses in high school. Do you know when I got into college, I tested out of a bunch of courses before I even started? And that's what's hilarious about college. If you're actually intelligent and you understand the material and you test out of courses, you can't graduate from college. Why? Because you need credits. See, you can't be intelligent and get a degree. You have to go through their process. You have to pay money to go through all their long, boring classes of things that you do not need and will never use, like art history, okay? Or you take a philosophy class in which they don't really teach you philosophy. I mean, I've been through this junk, like mythology courses where you can learn all about paganism and have the teacher tell you that the Bible's just a pagan myth. Yeah, I've taken the courses, folks. They teach you a bunch of junk and they want you to pay for all of it. They don't want you to test out of everything and get a degree quickly. They want you to go through their indoctrination courses first. What is education? Think about, I encourage people to take this week, if you're a Christian, think about that for a while. Really consider what education, what it is, what the definition of it is, and what it really means. And then you'll understand, hopefully, if you take the time to think about the scripture that you know and what education really means, you'll see how indoctrinated we really are in this country, even about the term education. I remember, and folks, look, the reason I tested out of all these college courses, and look at all the stuff that I've gone to do programming, which takes a lot of algebra, and I've gone to author my own books, but I failed these courses in high school. Well, why? I was bored. I didn't want to do the homework. I wasn't being challenged. There was no practical application to anything we were doing. I didn't want to do it, so I didn't. I didn't do my homework. And of course, every report card, my parents, brought the hammer down on me, and I got grounded about every time I got a report card because I wasn't female enough, And the thing is, I wasn't being challenged, right? I had a guy that sat next to me during graduation, a graduation ceremony I didn't even want to go to, but I was begged by my family to go. And the guy that sat next to me, he had a C average just like I did when I graduated. The guy that sat next to me had over a 160 IQ because his parents every year would have him go and take IQ tests to see how intelligent he was. The guy was a genius. He had a C average just like I did. Why wasn't he getting straight A's if he was a genius? Same reason. He was bored. He didn't want to sit and do 100 math problems of something he already knew how to do. He didn't want to sit and write out paragraphs of things he already knew how to do. He wanted to be challenged, and he wasn't being challenged. I remember conversations with the guy, very briefly. I didn't get to have hardly any conversations with him, but all the time he would make me laugh. And the reason he would is because he was so brilliant. He was so witty in everything that he would say that he was like the only person at school that could really make me laugh. I loved it, And I rarely ever got to interact with him at all. But and part of that was because everybody liked him, but they hated me. You know how it goes. Anyway, I'm the nerdy guy, and he's the popular one, right? So anyway, but the point is that he was a genius sitting right beside me. I've never taken an IQ test. I don't know what I would score at. Probably wouldn't be that great anyway. But the point being is that why are people like he and I getting such low scores, but yet doing well in other things? Why are these boys, so many of them, can do so many different things, but they score so poorly in school? Well, again, we have a public education system that is dominated by female teachers. It is a female-dominated system. At least it's become that way over the past 50 years. Okay, it didn't used to be that way. But we need to understand that there are things today that have made it so that more women are picking up in the education system. Okay, I honestly think we should have a lot more men in the public education system. But there's certain factors you need to take into consideration of why most teachers today are female. And one of those is birth control. See, women used to grow up, become an adult, get married, get pregnant, have children. Or if they weren't as responsible, they would have unwed sex, get pregnant, and have children. And then they spent their lives being mothers and homemakers and caretakers for their family. That's typically what happened. Because somebody has to make a living and bring in resources, the men do that, and somebody has to breastfeed, the men can't do that, women have to breastfeed, so the women would stay home and men would go out and earn things, and that's the way God designed it to be. But what's happened is when you have things like birth control, women can then go and have as much sex as they want without having to actually get pregnant and actually be responsible for the choices that they're making. And then what they do is they go and they develop a career. And so once they get through college and realize, well, I don't really want any of these careers, I don't know what to do, so they get a general education degree, which allows them to go and teach. This is exactly, you'd be surprised how often this situation happens, okay? And so they start to dominate the classrooms because now they don't have a family of their own. Or if they do, basically, oh, okay, I can have a job and just put my child into the school system, which is basically like the public education system become a babysitter. It's a place you can throw your child into for 8 hours a day that's supposedly, in quotations, free. When it's not free, you're paying for it through your, or at least the people who own property are paying through it through their property taxes. I say specifically the people who own property, so we'll have to get into that one later. So they throw them in there. It's basically it's a babysitter for them, so they can keep working their day jobs, and then they have the public education, which is the state funded babysitter, and they don't actually have to raise their children. So there's a whole lot of things. There's other details we're going to get into on that specific topic later about people's situations, because I already know, based on everything I've said so far, there's going to be a lot of people who's going to be very upset and angry with me. What about this situation? What about that situation? I understand. I'm going to get to as many situations as we can, one step at a time. But I really felt like I needed to say some of that stuff, because the public education system is destroying good education. I'm not saying that the public education system is not educating. Oh, certainly they are. Remember the definition of educating. It's an upbringing of teaching mannerisms. But you see, folks, there is such a thing as good mannerisms and bad mannerisms. There is such a thing as good education and bad education. Yes, they're educating, but they're giving them bad education. Just like, they say, oh, well, it's back when I did the teaching on the fantasy novels, right? Just type in the word fantasy, Fantasy, into the search bar at creationliberty.com, and you'll get an article called Fantasy Novels, Invitations to Hell. And I'm sure almost every public education school system library, their personal libraries, has a copy of most of those things that I put in there. And they encourage, oh, look, they're reading the Chronicles of Narnia. Oh, look, they're reading Lord of the Rings. Oh, look, they're reading, the Twilight series. They're reading, name it, Harry Potter. They probably got those in there too. Oh, look, they're reading that stuff. They're getting a good education. No, they're not. They know how to read, but they're reading bad stuff and being encouraged to write about it. State doesn't care. They don't care. What they're more concerned about is make sure they're feminizing all the men so that way, because again, when the state decides to declare martial law, what's the first line of defense? Men. And if you don't have any men anymore, they're all acting like girls. Well, when the state comes along, they're going to be like, oh no, what do we do? Ladies, are you sure that's the kind of men you want in your lives? We have to stop and consider that for a little bit, okay? There's a reason boys act the way they are, and there's a reason they need to be raised differently than girls. And that's because they have a different role to fulfill than girls. So we need to keep that in mind. Anyway, let's give an example about a little bit of the differences between boys and girls and, achieving IQ tests and things like that. There's a guy, professional chess masters. Let's look at that, okay? Very few professional chess masters are women. I wasn't able to get an official statistic, but what I've heard is only 2% of professional chess masters in the world are women. It is a man-dominated field. Now, it's not because women can't play chess. Don't misunderstand. It's not that women don't have the capability to do it. Women don't care. That's the bottom line. Women make different life choices, and women don't care about chess. That's it. There was a lady once, I listened to some interview where she was talking about that issue, and she says, well, I think our girls... And she said, it's probably because... Now, I said, the second she said probably because, I was like, all you're doing is you're giving your personal speculation. I don't care what your opinion is, lady. What are the facts? She says, well, it's probably because when a girl's 12, she's not encouraged to play chess. Okay, all right, let's put that one to the test. Let's go to a public high school. Okay, let's say you're going to speak to a public high school. And you call all the high school girls in, ages, 14 to 18, right? You call all the public high school girls into the gymnasium. And they're singing, they're waiting, and you give an announcement. Hey, ladies, we've decided we're going to have a school-wide fashion show. We bring all these clothes in from all these professional places, and we're going to do all you ladies up, and all of you are going to participate in this school-wide fashion show. What's their reaction? Oh, wow, this is going to be great! They get so excited. Now go into and get all the girls together and go into the gymnasium and say, okay, ladies, we're going to have a school-wide women's chess tournament. And listen to the crickets chirp. Girls don't care. Now somebody's going to sit back and say, but I know this one girl. Great, you know this one girl. Thank you for pointing out the 0.001% that are different. Thank you. Okay, I get it. There are differences. I'm saying for the most part, girls don't care about such things. It's boys that care about that stuff. There's a guy by the name of Nigel Short. He's a former British world chess champion, and he has been cruelly criticized for something he said in an interview. And I want to read you this article from Time magazine called Chess Master Says Men Naturally Better Players Than Women. It says, quote, one of Britain's best chess players has sparked controversy after he said that women were inherently not as good as men at chess. Nigel Short, who lost to Garry Kasparov in the 1993 World Championship, told New in Chess magazine that we should gracefully accept it as a fact that women possess different skills than men, the Telegraph reports. Now, I happen to agree with him. Women possess different skills. That doesn't mean women's skills are less important. Don't misunderstand. But they do. They have different skills. I agree. He continues to say on here, because they're quoting him, he said, I don't have the slightest problem in acknowledging that my wife possesses a much higher degree of emotional intelligence than I do, he said. Likewise, she doesn't feel embarrassed in asking me to maneuver the car out of a narrow garage. One is not better than the other, we just have different skills. It would be wonderful to see more girls playing chess, and at a higher level, but rather than fretting about inequality, perhaps we should just gracefully accept it as a fact. End quote. Now what's wrong with that? Well, feminism. That's what's wrong with that, right? All he's doing is just explaining the truth. He says, my wife has different skills than I do. He says, why don't we just accept it? Why are we trying to change everything? There's no point in it. And certainly, many women, many more women, that are even more than are willing to come forward and talk about it for the most part, have listened to all the feminist lies, gone through all the feminist junk, gone through all this college to get into this great career, and then when they get into their 30s, they realize how lonely and depressed they are. Because in the end, many of them are like, I want a baby, I want a family, because there's certain things that they desire after. There's certain things that they want. And they're being taught by feminists to make life choices different than what they actually want. So, it's just that, and here, a lot of times what women could do, and some women might be upset with me saying this, but there's a lot of times you can go to a man and have him tell you, this is what you want. If you don't understand it and your emotions are going crazy, a lot of times it's good to have that man there, a pillar, like a father, for example, to say, look, all right, let's just focus on what it is you actually want here. It's good to have a father or a husband or somebody like that you can go to, especially one who has some wisdom, to understand what it is that, to gain some focus and gain some perspective about what's actually going on. Because emotions can swirl a lot of times, and they can confuse sometimes. And it's good to have a pillar to come back to hang on to say, okay, this is going to clear my head. Let's focus on the task at hand, right? But what's happening is that our public education system is destroying our boys. They're making them into girls before they even become men, and then we don't have that to hang on to anymore. It's getting harder and harder to find real men anymore that have understanding. So let's get back to what I was talking about last week with just teachers just being caregivers mostly. And a caregiver, for those of you who don't know, it's not just someone who looks after a child, but it can be a nanny, a maid, daycare workers, whatever it is, okay? But teachers are really becoming caregivers more than educators. And some of the teachers that actually understand this are going to be honest about it will agree with me because they've seen it. And I've already had some teachers that come and said, you are absolutely right about what's going on here. They know. But it's important for us to understand that most of those teachers are made up of women. Now, the Wayne State University Journal of Developmental Psychology did a study back in 2012 and found that boys are generally receiving lower quality care from caregivers than girls are. Very interesting. This is the Merrill Palmer Quarterly, an article study they had called Boys, Girls, and the Two Cultures of Child Care. They said, quote, this study examined differences in the quality of child care experienced by toddler boys and girls. Boys were more likely to be in lower quality child care than girls, assessed with both setting level measures and observations of caregiver-child interaction. As hypothesized, the caregivers of the toddlers in this sample revealed significantly more negative perceptions of boys than of girls. They not only portrayed boys as displaying more problematic, active, and disinhibited behavior, but also indicated that their relationships with boys were characterized by greater conflict and less closeness than their relationships with girls. Importantly, the caregivers' portrayals of their relationships with boys and girls are conflictual or close were significantly intercorrelated with their portrayals of whether the children displayed behavior problems and active angry temperaments, suggesting a strong generalized negative boys or positive girls view of children in their care. Their perceptions of the children were also associated with caregiving quality, such as that more negative views of a given child, regardless of gender, predicted poorer quality caregiving rated by independent observers for that child, end quote. Now, most of you probably didn't even understand that, or you shut off your brains probably 2 sentences into that, okay? Let me try to explain. First of all, we need to note that this study used independent observers to rate the children before the caretakers were brought in to interact with them, okay? They observed them as a third party viewing it, and they said the boys and the girls are acting exactly the same with the study they did. That's why these boys and girls were chosen, was particularly for their behavior. They were behaving exactly the same. Multiple third parties confirmed it before they ever brought in the caretakers for the study. And the third-party independent observers said specifically that the children did not, quote, differ in their peer interactions or compliance with caregivers, nor did they differ in lab-based observations of temperament, end quote, which means they had people observing while the caregivers were there, and the third party said there was no difference in the behavior of the boys or the girls. They behaved exactly the same with their interactions and compliance with the caregivers. They were very well behaved, all right? But the problem is that the study came out and said that the boys were behaving poorly. Not the study, excuse me, but the results the caregivers reported saying that the boys were misbehaving or they were behaving poorly, when the third-party observers said no, they weren't. Well, how do you get that? That's why they said less quality care is being given to the boys, because they're not connecting with the caregivers on a relationship level. What that means is that the caregivers are actually biased in favor of girls. From the moment boys are born, they're automatically biased against. They're fought against immediately. So what the caregivers are doing, they're giving negative feedback of the boys, quote, behaving poorly, end quote, because boys are expected to behave like girls. These boys are being fed propaganda and confusion before they've barely learned to walk on their own, thinking that everything that they do as a male is error and based on bad behavior that needs to be fixed. The study continues and says, quote, the finding regarding caregiver portrayals of their relationships with the children is of particular concern in light of substantial evidence that positive student-teacher-caregiver relationships play an important and perhaps predictive role in fostering children's positive engagement in both academic and social aspects of early schooling. Oh, maybe you wonder why that might be, that boys are doing worse in school. That could be one of the factors to play into that as well. So first of all, they're taught that they are wrong to be males. They need to be female, and then they're put into an all-female or mostly female teacher society it's mostly dominated by females, teaching female habits and aspects, teaching them to be females and condemning them and punishing them if they act like males in any way. Maybe that has something to do with the reason boys are not doing so well letter grade-wise in school. Study continues and says, it is difficult to believe that caregivers of 2-year-olds have developed gender-linked stereotypes that disadvantage boys, although this is precisely what our findings imply, a possibility that is important to examine in future research, end quote. What did they just say there? They said it's difficult for us to even conceive that 2-year-olds are being biased against by caregivers. They said, but that's exactly what we found. That's frightening when you consider that the National Women's Law Center has shown the statistics and said that 94% of child care workers are women. That means boys are being frowned upon and destroyed before they're even old enough to have enough personality development to differentiate their behavior from girls. I mean, and what they do is because of their so-called, in quotations, behavioral problems, most parents and schools immediately put them on drugs to so-called solve the problem. It's exactly how they handle it. Let me put this in perspective for a moment, just to give you a different example. Because like I said before, I'm going to give examples where I'm going to insert racism for sexism, right? We're going to see how you react. Let's suppose a white-skinned teacher. All right, now imagine the media gets a hold of this story, and you imagine what happens. Let's suppose a white-skinned teacher is questioned about her relationship with her students, and she said she favored or is happier with the white-skinned children, but the black-skinned children were just misbehaving all the time and frustrating to deal with. And so the school and the state determined that the black-skinned children have mental problems and they need to be drugged with things like Ritalin, so they act more like the white-skinned children. People would lose their minds. Media explosion, there would be weeks of this junk going on, there would be riots in the streets over this thing right here. But, of course, they say this is clear racist bigotry against blacks, yeah. But when it comes to men, when it comes to boys, who cares? They're expendable, right? No one asks a question when it comes to sexist bigotry against males. And what are boys raised to do? Take it. You're supposed to be tough, so just take it. Act like a female, but take it like a man. Do you see the contradiction? I mean, is there a little bit of contradiction going on here? I mean, I talk about this like it's driving me nuts because when I go back and look and see how I grew up with all this philosophy around me and I never even saw it because I didn't know any better. My family, my teachers, church, places like that, they all had this philosophy and they didn't even realize it. They were teaching it and didn't realize it. Do you see what things like television does to your mind? Can you begin to see why I tell people to get away from the television? Because it starts to teach a philosophy that's bad. And this is the ultimate goal, by the way, from the elite who are in charge. This is exactly what they want, to break down the society. It's exactly how you bring in communism. You destroy the philosophy, and you destroy, and that the kind of philosophy that feminism brings is a philosophy that destroys men, and when you destroy men, you destroy the family, because the man is the core of the family. You destroy the family, and you destroy your first line of defense of the country. There's going to be consequences to this stuff. So, boys, they get all this indoctrination as they're going through these preschool days, and they get into things like middle school, and they get into these classrooms dominated by female teachers, and they think that everything they're doing is wrong. They're being marked down for misbehavior all the time, when in reality, yes, there's some things where they're being purposely disrupted, but a lot of times what boys need, just like I talked about earlier, is hands-on activity. They need to know, they need to have a justification. Why are we doing this? Okay? And it's a matter of they not only need to be philosophically justified in why they're doing it, but also have hands-on activity to actually apply what they're doing. Why do you think in places like science classes that boys tend to excel so much more? Because in a lot of science classes, you're supposed to have more hands-on activity. And a lot of teachers do not want to create hands-on activity for boys. They don't want to deal with boys because it's more difficult to deal with boys than it is with girls, right? So they just want everybody to act like a girl. Public education system is destroying your young men. Get your boys out of it if you can. I always tell people, get your children out of the public school system as soon as possible so they can start learning something. So getting past things like elementary and middle school, now you're getting onto high school, and now you're developing boys who are becoming more adults, and they're more able. It's easier for them as they get older to be able to sit and be quiet and learn and control themselves a little bit more than when they're younger. Christopher Cornwell, who's the head of economics at the University of Georgia's College of Business, he gives another unique perspective after his study of 5,800 students. Now, I mentioned this earlier. I kind of got ahead of myself. But he studied 5,800 students from kindergarten through 5th grade, and he said in this UGA Today article, quote, "Girls didn't all of a sudden become more engaged, and boys didn't suddenly become more rambunctious. Their attitudes toward learning were always this way, but it didn't show up in educational attainment like it does today because of all the factors that previously discouraged women's participation in the labor force, such as a lack of access to reliable birth control," end quote. So I'm not the only one saying that, okay? That, for example, the modern conveniences I talked about, the invention of labor-saving devices, that make it easier to get certain things done. It gives women more time with their day. And then on top of that, when they don't have children to take care of, well, what do they do with their day? Well, I'm going to go have a career. And then usually the career that they choose, as we're going to see later, because we're going to get into that when we get into things about the wage gap and the labor force and all that stuff. When we talk about those issues, we're going to see that women choose more jobs that are personally relatable, things like where you have personal interactions with people face to face, like administration, nursing, teaching, things like that where there's personal interaction, and they choose less jobs that pay more. Less women will choose jobs that pay more, like the STEM jobs, which is like science, technology, engineering, mathematics. And we'll discuss more on that later. since we covered the sexism in favor of girls, because of male privilege. That's why there's so much bias in favor of girls all the time in the education system, because of male privilege, right? But let's look at divorce proceedings. Now, despite what some of you out there may have learned through the media, through your school, through any type of television that you may have watched, women are the primary filers of divorce. Men are not. This is from the American Law and Economics Association, an article they have, or study they did, It says, these boots are made for walking, why most divorce filers are women, which says, quote, throughout most of American history, wives rather than husbands have filed for divorce. The proportion of wife-filed cases has ranged from around 60% for most of the 19th century to immediately after the introduction of the no-fault divorce, more than 70% in some states. Today, with some variation among states, it remains slightly above 2/3. The standard explanations for this behavior include the following. Women file to assure their innocence in the underlying proceeding. So, why do women file? Well, you see, if they file first in a courtroom, they're going to seem like they're the innocent victim. See, that's one of the reasons they file. They go on the attack first thing. Next, it says women file to secure rights to custody. See, if they file for the divorce, well, it seems like she's the responsible parent. It gives the impression in a courtroom. Then, next, it says that she files to secure the rights to custody, support, and attorney's fees. Right, because if the man is the primary breadwinner, who pays for the attorney? Not only does he have to pay her attorney fees, but his own, assuming he can even afford them, because he has to get a different attorney. He can't get the same one. It continues, it says, or women file simply because it is more convenient for them to do so. Oh, breaking up the family is just so convenient for her. Get the man out of the picture, right? No more husband, no more father. What a wonderful world. Because male privilege. It continues, it says, while these explanations have some merit, even in combination, they cannot explain the variation in filing rates across states. What? Now, wait a second. Think about that. It says, while these explanations have some merit, meaning that they do have factors into why the numbers are so high for women filing first and initiating the divorces. They said even the combination of all these explanations, they said, cannot explain the variation in filing rates across the states. Meaning that it doesn't explain away why women's rates of filing divorce and initiating the breaking up of the family is so high. Because after all, what do we learn all the time from the media? We learn that the woman is the center of the family, right? She's the one that keeps the family together, when the actual statistics on divorce rates says the opposite. It says that it's the men that don't want to break up the family. It tends to be the women that want to do that. It ends by saying the persistence of the gender gap in filing through time, nor the systematic filing behavior, end quote. And that was in the context of that it cannot explain the variation in filing rates. Like they literally, statistically, could not figure out why it was so high. Well, that's because statistical analysis can only give you so much information. It can give you a lot of really important information. Don't misunderstand. But there's a certain point where statistical analysis cannot explain phenomenon. And it cannot explain this because statistical analysis cannot explain someone's philosophy. Because there's one philosophy that statistical analysis, like that, what they were doing there, that study, it cannot figure out, and that's feminism. The feminist philosophy. See, going back to the issue of no-fault divorces, which I mentioned in a previous part, okay? And that, again, no-fault divorce means you used to have to find fault in a spouse before you could get divorced. Because if you could imagine back in the day, a couple get married and they want to go into court, we want a divorce. And they said, okay, why? We don't like each other. You know what the courts would tell them to do? Work it out. Quit wasting taxpayers' time and money. Next. Oh, what a wonderful world that would be, right? But that's not the way it is anymore. Not at all. And again, I discourage people from getting into the trap of getting into these marriage contracts, these corporate business contracts. which they call a marriage license. I warn people about the trap you're getting into. Again, go back to our teaching on marriage that I talked about earlier. Find that, listen to it. I've got like a, 5-part teaching on it, and there's also a full-length article you can read on the subject that'll explain a lot more to you and give you a lot of scripture on that. So, no-fault divorce means you just get divorced for any reason. And I wanted to point this out because I found this hilarious. And you guys remember, perhaps if you were listening carefully, I mentioned a lady by the name of Phyllis Schlafly earlier in this teaching. And she really was one of the key leaders of the pro-family movement that was going on. I mean, it was back in the 1970s. It became, towards in the 1980s, the pro-family movement, and then that's really existed up through today. And they were fighting against the ERA, which I said was the Equal Rights Amendment that was it was basically an attack on housewives and wanted all equality for men and women in all things, which was really, really bad. It was going to make women sign up for the draft and all sorts of wicked things that were coming out of the feminists. Okay, it was a feminist amendment they were trying to put into the Constitution. But what was hypocritical about Phyllis Schlafly is that she wanted to get Ronald Reagan's assurance of his stance against the ERA. She says, I wanted you to support our pro-family movement and make sure that you're standing against the ERA. But here's the hypocritical thing about all that, because remember, it's the pro-family movement, right? That's against the divorcing of men and women and all that stuff, right? Ronald Reagan was the first person during his tenure as governor of California to pass into law the no-fault divorce policy. He was the first person to do that, for the first state to do it. And that was the beginning of a wildfire that started destroying families all across the country. I mean, amazing that she's going to get his approval when he's part of the problem at the time. So anyway, I just want to point that out on the side. So some of the states that analyze, if you actually go, now I provide some of the charts and the numbers on directly like screenshots of the study that you can go look. It's on the website if you're following along. But some of the states analyzed in the study had women filing for divorce as high as 81%. That's over 4 out of 5 divorces were initiated by women. But on average, if you take the entire countrywide average, women divorce men over 2 to 1. Which really destroys any kind of preconceived mainstream media impression that women are trying to keep the family together, doesn't it? Now, granted, some of these divorce proceedings are over things like drunken abuse. However, it's by drunken abuse not just by men, but by women as well. And affairs by both men and women. It's so funny that men are the ones that get accused of the affair stuff all the time. I mean, that's the limelight. Men are in the limelight for being the prominent problem with affairs, but I have to remind people that men are sleeping with someone, and it's typically not another man. There are women involved in all these things, but it seems like women are just kind of given the back seat there, right? But again, we have to stop and consider that it's statistically impossible for those factors to account for the incredibly high percentage of women who file for divorce across the U.S. because the instances of those divorces, it doesn't match the statistics at all. I'll show you what I'm talking about. A lady by the name of Margaret Brennig, who's an associate dean for the faculty research at Notre Dame Law School, who performed a study with Douglas Allen, who's an economics faculty at Simon Fraser University. And this is what, in their book, Family, Law, and Community, they said, quote, "The results Allen and I found using divorce statistics were consistent with our hypothesis that filing behavior is driven by some sort of self-interest at the time of divorce. Individuals file for divorce when there are marital assets that may be appropriated through divorce, as in the case of leaving after receiving the benefit of educational investments such as advanced degrees. However, individuals may also file when they are being exploited within a marriage, as when the other party commits a major violation of the marriage contract, such as cruelty, which is legally that means physical or psychological damage." So what they're saying here is that when it says individuals file for divorce when there are marital assets that may be appropriated through divorce, I know there's a lot of people that listen to me quote this stuff that might shut off their brains, or at least that you're thinking about something else while I'm talking about that, there's a simple phrase for that sentence. It's called a gold digger. Okay? And gold digger is typically applied to women in most instances, right? What they do is they wait until a man has achieved something grand, and then she's like, well, I don't want to be with him anymore because I can get the money, and they file for divorce to get the money. No fault divorce, and I'm going to take as much as I can of what he owns. Why does she deserve to take most everything he owns and give him all this grief? I mean, it's like these women sit back and think they deserve it. For what exactly? All that hard work and everything he's put into that stuff, and she's just going to take a bunch of it. Well, there's a bunch of them that do that stuff. Anyway, it continues and talks about this. It says, interestingly, though, cruelty amounts to only a small percentage of all divorce filings in Virginia, 6%, the only state whose data permitted us to sort out the proven reasons for divorce. Now, that could be for one of two reasons. I don't know the reasons they give for that, but Virginia either was the only state that allowed them to look at it, or it's the only state that actually recorded the data properly so they can figure out the proven reasons for divorce. So they analyzed Virginia, and they said cruelty, well, that's physical abuse or psychological damage, whatever it is, that's only 6% of the divorce filings. Well, then why is it that women are filing huge amounts over men? Good question. They continue to say, we found that who gets the children is by far the most important component in deciding who files for divorce, particularly when there is little quarrel about property, as when the separation is long. What does all this mean for divorce reform and for predictions of future filing behavior? It suggests that as men's and women's labor force income becomes more nearly equal, the state difference in filing rates should disappear and will likely be determined by custody alone. End quote. So they said it's all about who gets the children. Well, she wants the children, right? Does that mean the men don't want the children? No, that doesn't mean that at all. They said, but women get the children most of the time. Well, I'm going to show you why women get the children most of the time, okay? And we're only going to start chipping at that iceberg now because it's going to be many parts later that we're going to come to understand the full extent of why women are getting the children most of the time. But it says, well, as women get more into the labor force, then filing rates are going to disappear. Well, first of all, that's not happened. Okay, the filing rates are not disappearing, number one. But the amount of divorces are actually going down. Statistically, they are decreasing over time. Is that because their predictions are coming true? No. I can tell you why the divorces are going down. It's because the amount of marriages are going down at the same rate. I did an article called Is Slavery Allowed in the Bible? To combat all those atheists that take the Bible out of its context and just try to make it say whatever they want it to say instead of what it actually says. And you can just type in the word slave, S-L-A-V-E, into the search bar at creationliberty.com, and there's more information on that. And I actually put in there charts that show the statistics on, or at least the data that's come back on marriages and divorces. And it's showing that there is a decline in divorces, but that's because there's a decline in marriages. See, not as many people are getting married. Because what people are starting to say now, they said, we know the cause of divorce, it's marriage. You've got to be kidding me. That's like saying the cause of stupid statements is having a brain. Well, if we just get rid of the brain, there won't be stupid statements anymore. Well, maybe you have a point there. I don't know. But saying, marriage is what causes divorce. It's the wickedness of people that's causing divorce. It's the hardness of their hearts that's causing it. I mean, stop and think about that. If we just get rid of brains, we won't have stupid statements anymore. Perhaps you can just change your way of thinking? Maybe that's a solution. Anyway, the courts always want to do what they call what's in the best interest of the children. It's a legal term, actually. The best interest of the child. If they were going to do what's in the best interest of the child, they would tell the parents, look, whatever your problems are, work it out. Quit wasting our time. Next. And they used to do that, but they don't do that anymore. The courts are just pumping out divorces in like a factory conveyor belt fashion. And the primary care of the children is granted to one of the two parents in most instances. It's referred to as the custodial parent. in almost all cases. Very, very few percentage cases they're actually doing a joint custody thing. But anyway, they're saying, well, we predict that this is going to change as women we get into the workforce. Actually, that's not the case for many different reasons. Many reasons. I almost can't really address them right now because I'm getting ahead of myself. But even the fact that women who are single mothers actually work less than men who are single fathers. Men still end up working more whether they're married or not than women do. Most women will get divorced and just live off the payments that they get from the men. I say most women, not all women, but the majority of them do. So let's go to this United States Census Bureau report that is entitled Custodial Mothers and Fathers and Their Child Support, which says, quote, the majority of custodial parents were mothers, 82.2%, and about 1 in 6, 17.8%, were fathers. Proportions were not statistically different from 1994, end quote. So they're saying from 1994 up to 2011, when they did this study, that the proportions were almost exactly the same. You've got over 80% who are mothers, being the custodial parent. She was awarded custody of the children, and less than 20% were fathers. So 6-1 over men. Now, of course, what's a feminist going to say to that? She's going to say, well, men are evil or bad, or fathers are rapists, or they're violent abusers. That's what they always accuse everyone of, right? They accuse all men of being this kind of stuff. But if we'll see in statistics later that women hold equal, if not more fault for violent acts and evil as men do. I'm going to show you those statistics later. We're going to find out that most abuse is actually coming from women, not from men. And so, anyway, based on this, we can conclude that women are filing for divorce to break up the family 2-1 over men, and then they take the children in those cases 6-1 over men out of those 2-1 cases. Or not 2-1 cases, I'm sorry. They're filing 2-1 over men and then taking the children 6-1. And they leave the children fatherless in most cases. Now, here's a question. If we lived in such a male-privileged society, why aren't men winning the custody battles more often than women? Why aren't men being given the favor? Why are women the ones that are being given the favor in all these cases? Obviously because of male privilege. We need to consider that less than 18% of men win custody battles of their children. Now, in most of those cases, the mother doesn't even show up to court. That's why the men win that small percentage amount of time, is because most of those instances the women don't show up. If the woman would have showed up, she would have got custody of the children in most cases. Winning by default isn't technically a win concerning custody statistics, but that's the way they report it. I wish they would give the totals based on how many men have gone to court and actually with the mother there on top of it have actually won custody of the children. I'd love to see those statistics, because I guarantee you they are incredibly tiny. The Supreme Court of Nebraska office released a study about custody hearings in family court in order to analyze the often used legal phrase I mentioned earlier, the best interest of the child. They said an effort to, quote, help divorcing parents to place their child at the center of parental decision-making as opposed to having their child caught in the middle of adult disputes, end quote. Boy, our government, we elect our representatives, I guess, to hold office, not really to think, do we? That is a stupid statement. Help divorcing parents to place their child at the center of parental decision-making as opposed to having their child caught in the middle of adult disputes? If you go to court over custody, your child is in the smack middle of adult disputes. Because what's happening? Mom is saying, Judge, blah, 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 I hate him. Father, blah, 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 I hate her. So they're both giving their side of the arguments, and neither of them is actually making a decision. Neither of them is working together. They're pleading with the court to make a decision about the children, which means it's not at the center of parental decision-making, it's court decision-making, and they're in the smack middle of adult disputes. How are you helping to avoid this? If you really wanted to avoid it, you'd tell the parents to stay together and work it out. But they don't do that. In this Nebraska custody court file research study, they chose 392 sample cases at random out of almost 70,000 cases in Nebraska between 2002 and 2012. So over a 10-year period, they just picked out 392 random cases and said, we're going to analyze these and try to find a statistical average here. Fair enough, okay? If you go onto the website, I've made these charts, and like I've told people before, I spent many, many hours making these charts so you guys could get a clear picture of what's going on here. And you can see the mothers in red and the fathers in blue, and you can see how tiny the percentages of the father are and how huge the percentages are of the mother are in each category on this. In their study, they said, quote, of the 392 cases, there were 663 children included in the analysis, almost equal boys and girls under the age of 18. Plaintiffs were more likely to be mothers, and the defendants were more likely to be fathers. Fathers had statistically higher incomes than mothers. Both plaintiffs and defendants reported that children were more likely residing in the primary residence of the mother at the time of the filing. Okay, that plays a big factor too. Because first of all, in many of these instances, the mother, while the father is off trying to bring in resources for the family, basically kidnaps her children. Because I'm sure the father doesn't agree with it, and the children don't necessarily agree with it, but they don't know what's going on. She kidnaps the children and takes them off to some other residence, staying with someone, or even sometimes getting a small apartment, which actually comes off his dime. That happens quite often too. We're going to get into some examples of some of this stuff going on later. But fathers had statistically higher incomes than mothers. The children were living with the mother at the time of the filing, so she leaves her husband, kidnaps the children, then files for divorce. How brave. How brave. In the original complaint, parties requested joint custody about 1 out of 7 of the time. So 1 out of 7, we're talking roughly maybe 14-15%. Okay? In a vast majority of cases, plaintiffs, that means who is the plaintiff in most cases? Women. In a vast majority of cases, plaintiffs were represented by attorneys at the time of the filing of the complaint. Defendants, upon entry into the case, were represented about half of the cases. End quote. Why is that? Fathers had higher incomes. Whose money is she spending to hire an attorney? His. What money does he have left over to defend himself? Very little, if any. Okay, so since women are filing first, the favor in court is already being given to the woman as being the victim, right? And men having statistically higher incomes is not due to a wage gap. We're going to see that later, all right? Now, most of these custody hearings are taking place during the divorce, so guess who is paying the woman's lawyer fees? I mean, this is easy to see. But most people don't even stop to consider this, except for a lot of times the men who've been through it. The women who've made him pay her lawyer fees don't often talk about that, if ever. It's only the men who've been through it who talk about it, and who's going to listen to them? What help groups does he have? Who are going to listen to his woes? You know what happens when he complains about that? Other men might be like, man, that's tough. Let's get back to work. Or, well, suck it up, buddy. Part of being a man. Why? Because male privilege. Now, the children in most cases living with the mother. So, from a court's perspective, to move the children from their mother in with their father is usually automatically seen as not in the best interest of the child. It's too much extra trauma. So they typically leave them with the mother, right? And on top of that, I mean, how hard is it for him to take the children when now he's got to care for them and pay for them, when he's paying for her lawyer fees, possibly for her other staying arrangements on top of that? He's paying for all the stuff that's going to leave him broke. He's going bankrupt over what she's doing, and she doesn't care as long as the man's out of the picture of the family. I mean, she will burn him at the stake so long as she can get him out of the family. That's what happens in most cases. I'm not saying all cases. I understand there are different circumstances. But in most cases, this is what's happening, statistically. Because not only will he have to do all that and pay all this, you haven't even considered up to 40% of his income for child support or alimony payments on top of that. I mean, when he is biased against, he's already fought against in the courts, everything is incentivized against him for even trying to get his children, to get custody of his children. Most men give up before they've even started the fight because their lawyers, and I challenge you, go talk to a divorce lawyer. They know how these things work. Most men are even encouraged by their divorce lawyer, look, you're going to lose this. In most, they'll look at their situation and say, look, in most instances, you're going to lose this. And the men give up so that way they don't go bankrupt and can still continue to provide for their children. They just let her have her way. Because she is given so much bias and benefit in the court system and from support groups and feminist groups on top of that he just gives up and lets her have her way. Why is she getting all this support and men are just getting burdened so much? Obviously because male privilege. Now certainly there are deadbeat dads out there. I'm not arguing that. Yeah, there's deadbeat dads out there. I get that there are. But you see, statistically, there are more deadbeat moms than there are deadbeat dads. Yes, you heard me right. Statistically, there are more deadbeat moms because men actually they're required to pay more child support than women are, and women actually pay less often than men do. That's something a lot of people don't know much about. And that's a good place for us to stop. We will start covering that next week. We'll show you the statistics on how men are having to actually pay more and do on their own voluntarily pay more than women do. There are more deadbeat moms than deadbeat dads, but we never hear about the deadbeat moms, do we? Almost never do we hear about deadbeat moms. And we'll also talk about the poverty status between men and women when divorces go through and based on the sole custody, that men provide more, whether they get custody or not, they provide more than women do. And most women are just sufficient to live off the child support payments. And then we're going to go into the tragic issue of female rapists and how men are being required to pay for the female rapists. It's abhorrent, but that's the kind of thing that's actually happened. We're going to go over that next week. Did anybody have any questions or comments about anything we talked about today before we close? Well, thanks for joining us, everybody, this week, and may our Lord Jesus Christ bless and protect you all as you seek to study His Word and glorify Him in all that you say and do, and God willing, we will see you next week.